Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I am going to be talking about 4 books and reading a little bit from each of them. 4 very small books. Really delightful books. The books with which I am finishing out, or actually have finished out, the year 2024. It has been my practice since becoming a booktuber to make a video which I designate as a recent reads video, where I take, say, the last 3 books, or in this case 4, that I have just finished, and make a small video talking about them. So there exists a playlist with all of the recent reads videos I have done since turning this channel into a booktube channel. As the end of the year closed in on me, I kept finding just a little bit more time available to me, and so I would slide in another book that had not been in any way planned, and so I centered on slim books from my bookshelf because I didn't know how long it would take. And the first one that I opted for was The Beginnings of Chinese Civilization by Li Qi, or Li Ji, I think you would say. Now, he was the archaeologist who conducted the excavations at Anyang, which made a splash almost 100 years ago. So he's a very important figure in early Chinese archaeology. This is a book of 3 lectures which he gave. This is printed in 1957. So the information contained therein may not be the most up-to-date, but as a place to start, it's wonderful, especially because you have an eyewitness to the earth-shaking events of all of the wondrous artifacts and so forth that were pulled up. When I hold the book up like that, I can't see it, so I hope you are getting a good. This one is just wonderful. Look at that. The book is such that the artifacts, the photos, are very well integrated with the text. He is a delightful author. I imagine he must have been a delightful speaker at these lectures. And the book itself is just, the design is just lovely in my view. So you have something like this kind of thing. It consists of only 3 lectures, and the total page count is something like 57. So I'll just, in another video, I read some bits from the beginning. So I'll just read the first paragraph of chapter 3 so you can get a sense of his writing style. The Bronze Age of China, as far as present knowledge goes, ranges from the middle of the 2nd millennium BC to the middle of the 1st millennium BC. Actually, of course, it lasted much more than 1,000 years, but it is difficult to fix a definite date either for its beginning or for its end. In the past, students of Chinese bronzes were so completely charmed and dazzled by the splendor of the ritual vessels that they scarcely found any chance to ponder upon the possibility of a humbler history for these antiquities. But like every other craft and institution, the bronze industry of China never was a gift from heaven. It emerged gradually and developed step by step. At least modern archaeology is proving this to be the case. So he is also the author of a book about Anyang. I assume there are plenty of plates displaying what was retrieved, and just a general description of the whole experience. I have it on order coming to me, but I don't know that I will get to it soon. But as a brief introduction to the beginnings, it's wonderful. Probably it should be supplemented by more current information. So that was the first book that I pulled off of my shelf. I don't quite know when I picked it up or why I picked it up. The next book, however, which I went for, The Decipherment of Linear B, I know exactly when and where I picked it up. If you look at the back, there's a price sticker from Powell's bookstore in Portland, and that's about 15 years ago. So obviously 15 years ago, I was in Portland, saw the book, and grabbed for it. And I have not had any reason to pull it down since then, but this little window of time at the end of the year gave me the initiative to do so. I, of course, heard about Chadwick and Ventris many years ago, probably 35 to 40 years ago, when I first discovered Moses Finley. There's Michael Ventris. He was the man who broke the code, so to speak, and very quickly he and John Chadwick formed a partnership and published articles and shook the community. Now I'm just looking to see the parts. So, well, I'll just read I've always heard that writing evolved initially as a mechanism for accounting purposes. All of our literature and so forth was not there at its inception. I'm sure that those things existed, but not in written form. And this is actually the first time I really have been able to see that process as it happened. So let me just read you about a page from this, a little more than a page. It may, ... seem odd that such a useful invention as writing should be confined to such humdrum uses. Why should not letters, histories, or even poems have been written down? The clumsiness of the script imposes a limitation. We may question how far a document in Linear B would be readily intelligible to someone who had no knowledge of the circumstances of its writing. It is rather like shorthand. The man who wrote it will have little difficulty in reading it back, but a total stranger might well be puzzled unless he knew what the contents were likely to be. Thus, the existence of books and a reading public is unlikely from the outset. The chances that the archaeologist's spade will one day reveal a Mycenaean library are slender indeed. But what of letters? Here, the case is rather different, for if we may judge from contemporary letters in other languages, a letter at this date was still in form, if not in practice, an instruction to the messenger. At Ugarit, for instance, the regular formula at the beginning of a letter is like this: to the king, my master, say ... Or, thus the king of the country of Birutu, to the prefect of the country of Ugarit, my son, say ... Linear B would be equal to this mnemonic function. It may not be irrelevant to mention that Ventris and I succeeded occasionally in sending each other messages written in Linear B in an imitation of the Mycenaean dialect. One such was sent to mark the completion of the manuscript of documents. It read in translation, "John to Michael, greetings. Today I handed over the book to the printers. Good luck. Cambridge, June 7." Ventris commented that it was considerably easier to read than most tablets. Lastly, we must deal briefly with a thorny problem. What light do the tablets cast on the Homeric poems? It is a difficult question because its answer depends upon many factors outside the scope of this book. To treat it fairly would demand a full description of the world Homer depicts, a detailed review of the archaeological evidence for Greek life between the 15th and 7th centuries BC, a discussion of the process of composition of the poems and their transmission down to the present day. At present, there are two schools of thought: those who believe that the Mycenaean element in Homer is great, and those who think it is small. A compromise here is possibly the best solution. So, Moses Finley's book, The World of Odysseus, was published right around this time, maybe a year or so after. This was originally from 1958, so almost equal to the lectures that I just read from about the Chinese excavations. The World of Odysseus, I don't know if it could have been inspired by this or just that many people were thinking along the same lines. However, and certainly this would have been in the air before this was published, and before the initial documents were published. So that may have been what set Finley to write his famous book, The World of Odysseus, which made him a celebrity instantly. I think the book was revised subsequent to that, so I'm sure that the latest information at his time is there, but it does indeed touch upon some of those themes. So I'm going to read one more little passage from a postscript, which was written maybe 9 years after more things had been excavated and more parts of the code, if you will, had been broken because a lot of scholars were sticking their hands into the solving of the puzzle. This is going to follow up a little bit on the exact theme that I just read from. Naturally enough, those scholars who had previously committed themselves to the view that Linear B could not contain Greek have been reluctant to admit their error. Other critics have started from preconceived notions about the nature of the writing. That the Greek of the time, wrote one, by a kind of shorthand, left out the endings and wrote, so to speak, only the stem of the word is most inconceivable of all possibilities. Looked at from the point of view of our modern alphabets, it may well seem strange that the Greeks of the Mycenaean age were content with so ill-adapted a system. But we must remember, and the evidence goes on increasing, that the Mycenaeans never used Linear B except for accounts, inventories, and similar brief notes. There is no example of continuous prose, which would demand a system providing an accurate notation of inflectional elements. The script is appropriate to its actual use, which is no more than an elaborate kind of mnemonic device. We must, therefore, not criticize the Mycenaeans for having failed to devise a system of writing as efficient as that of their Oriental neighbors. So, it says Postscript, January 1967. So, this has been reprinted. I don't know if later editions have a nice fold out like this. I would think that they would not. And indeed, you would not think that they needed to print a fold out for just this. But very, very nice, the care and attention that used to go in the production of these old books. So these are my first two from the 1950s. And again, it would be a wonderful starting point from somebody who was there. You know, there's a certain excitement to both of these books that you will not have on something that was just published last year. So the next book, as it turned out that I had more and more time available to me, is the anthology of Chinese rhyme prose, translated by Burton Watson. I recently read the Dragon Carving and the Literary Mind, or The Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons, however you want to translate that. And so I must have bought this book 8 years ago or so when I first attempted to read that book. I DNF'd that. I did not finish it. And since I did finish it and have always wondered exactly what Chinese rhyme prose referred to, one hears it made reference to often enough, I thought that this would be the perfect time. It's not an exhaustive anthology. I think there's only about 13 poems or 15 poems, something like that, but covering the whole breadth of it. And rather than read any of the poems, I would like to read just a little bit here and there from Burton Watson's introduction. So, one of the charges, the form in Chinese is called the fu, so Chinese rhyme prose. One of the charges most frequently made against the fu, particularly by modern sociologically oriented critics, is that it is representative of one class in society only, that of the ruler and his ministers and courtiers. It is true that nearly all the fu were written by scholar officials. In most periods of Chinese history, the only men who had the learning needed to handle such a demanding form. And many of them treat themes associated with the life of the court or the glorification of the ruling house. This unquestionably makes for a certain monotony of subject and tone, as the writers themselves long ago recognized. We have seen how Chang Heng attempted to relieve this monotony by introducing scenes from the life of the common people into his cityscapes, and the same desire to broaden the scope and appeal of the fu form is apparent in the works of songwriters such as Su Tongpo. The fact that the rhyme prose pieces are largely the product of a single class or group in society may well make them less varied or interesting than other types of literature, but unless one is prepared to argue that the works of one social class are by definition inferior to those of another, I hardly think it makes them less valuable as artistic creations. The form itself is kind of in most cases, a combination of prose, exposition, and poetry. In some cases, the prose exposition is done away with. And again, instead of reading from one of the pieces itself, I'd just like to read, probably my favorite in the book is the one called The Idle Life by Pan Yue. I have no idea how to pronounce any of this stuff, but I'll just read how he introduces the piece. Pan Yue's Fu on the Idle Life begins with a long prose passage describing the 30 years of the writer's career as a government official, a humorously stop-and-go affair of complex advancements, transfers, and resignations. In his account, he stresses the words inept and ineptness as the refrain of his tale, returning to them repeatedly in order to make clear why in the end he thought it best to retire from politics and lead the life of country squire and filial son at his estate in the southern outskirts of Loyang. The poem itself describes the capital in the distance, its temples, schools, army barracks, and other state buildings overflowing into the suburbs. The poet's estate with its orchards and gardens and the happy life of the family that lived there. Happiness ended in AD 300 when Pan Yue, accused by a disgruntled rival, was executed on charges of treason. According to the harsh custom of the age, his mother, brothers, and other close kin were all obliged to share his fate. And that, of course, was not uncommon throughout the history of old China. But the poems will appeal to you differently, and that has to be my favorite one. I, of course, have long been a proponent of the idle life. Let's see if I can just read a little bit more from the appendix. Now, the appendix is something that needs to be read or ought to be read in this book. There are a couple of more poems. The form started out sort of as a riddle. I don't know what a riddle poem sort of thing. We have such stuff in the old literature of English as well. Not really of great interest except as a historical document, but they're worth looking at. And he has some criticism, including that book that I just read about dragon carving and the literary mind. He has some of that in here. I did not read the excerpts from that book, but all the rest I read and was very good. So now this is the original edition, and let's see who the publisher was. Columbia University Press. It's a very lovely book. I don't know, it's been reprinted by New York Review of Books probably about 10 years ago, and I don't know if that edition is as nice. I suspect not. This is lovely. And when I say that the poems may hit you differently, I should say that this probably is not a book for somebody who is just casually interested. You probably want to have a deeper interest into it. And by the way, that poet of the idle life, the poem essentially talked about living in the estate with the garden and all of that, and just said, I would just like to retire this way. Of course, it didn't happen so for him, but that was not the only one that I found very moving. So on to a little bit of the criticism, and I'm not sure. I'm not seeing this very, very clearly. So, this is from So Su from AD 300. So it's not recent criticism. When Sima Xiangju in his Fu on the Shanglin Park speaks of the loquats ripening in summer, when Yang Xiong in his Fu on the Sweet Springs presents us with jade trees in their green luxuriance, when Pan Ku in his Fu on the Western Capital exclaims over the catching of paired-eye fish, or when Chang Heng in his Fu on the Western Metropolis tells us that Zhou, the sea god, was swimming about. We know that they are merely dragging in the names of these rare and outlandish objects in order to enrich and color their works. Instances of this sort of thing are not confined to the examples above. If we look into the matter of fruits and trees, we will know that the ones mentioned in the examples are not native to that region. And if we delve into the question of supernatural beings, we will know that the one cited here would hardly be found in such a locale. As far as words go, it is easy enough to fashion such adornments and fripperies, but from the point of view of meaning, they are fictitious and without proof. If the jade goblet lacks a bottom, no matter how rare it may be, it is useless. If fine words lack a basis in fact, no matter how beautiful they may be, they cannot endure. But although critics unanimously attack the words mentioned above for their lack of care and precision, yet the majority of writers persist in holding them up as models of style. And when an action is repeated, in time it becomes habitual. The outcome is inevitable. I made up my mind that, using the fu on the 2 capitals as a model, I would compose my own fu on the 3 capitals. For the mountains and rivers, towns and cities involved, I pored over maps of the area. For the birds, animals, plants, and trees, I checked with local gazetteers. The songs and dances mentioned are in each case those that belong to the folkways of the particular region. The heroes and great men are invariably drawn from the history of its past. Why have I done all this? Because he who puts forth words to make a poem should sing of the appropriate emotion. He who ascends the high places and presents his poetic offering should celebrate the sights before him. He who would proclaim the beauty of things must do so by honoring their true nature. And he who would praise actions must do so by sticking to the facts. If there is no truth and no factuality, then how is the reader to believe what he is told? So, he never heard of poetic license. Of course, this is an argument that is long-standing, and there are positives and negatives on either side of the argument, and you cannot say that either side is right. I just think automatically of our example in the U.S. of Emily Dickinson as our best, our greatest poet. And she pulled things, vocabulary from all over the world for that very purpose. It was not that she had been to this or that place, and it works perfectly. And in fact, Burton Watson says in his translation, he is forced to resort to different plant names and so forth, because he's trying to make something that is readable to an English speaker, more so than something that is in fidelity 100% to every single bit of vocabulary. So, of more wide appeal would be the Four Huts, or Four Huts, also translated by Burton Watson. And this one, I don't know how long I've had. I know that long ago I made an attempt to read it, and it did not do anything for me. I didn't get it. And this is a case where, having read Mark Edward Lewis recently, he has a set of 3 books published by Harvard University Press dealing with Imperial China, starting at the Qin and the Han and going through the Tang dynasty. And having just recently read those three, a lot of this really fits together for me in a way that it never did, and so I got a lot of pleasure out of it. This is just a compilation of 4 short pieces. Let me see what he says. One is Chinese and 3 are Japanese. So I will read from Burton Watson again. All 4 are writers and poets, 2 of them very renowned poets, and all mention musical instruments or the pleasure they derive from music. One is Chinese, the other 3 are Japanese. One lives in a house that is rather grander than he would care to admit. The other 3 occupy what can only be described as huts. 2 have a wife and family. 2 are lifelong bachelors. All claim to be highly contented with their dwellings and say they hope to go on living in them, though not all of them do so. All are fervent followers of Buddhism, and 2 actually became monks in their later years. 2 wrote in Chinese, 2 wrote in Japanese. All clearly took pains to clothe their accounts in the most elegant and effective language they could devise. The first wrote his piece in 817, the second in 982, the third in 1212, the fourth in 1690. So when I first attempted this, it just seemed like a hodgepodge to me. Well, now that I understand the history, the first wrote his piece in 1817. He was of the Tang dynasty, and there was a great cultural movement, both with Buddhism and other aspects of Chinese culture into Japan, which led to the wondrous Heian period. About 10 years ago, I read the Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki, and if you read, and I read a lot of other pieces written by women. The women were all writing in Japanese, and they wrote all this brilliant stuff, mostly diaries, but the Tale of Genji is a novel. And the men, meanwhile, were writing Chinese in imitation of the Chinese precursors. And of course, their stuff, I thought none of their stuff survived. But the second piece in this book is a Japanese author, a male author of the Heian period, writing in Chinese. So it really kind of rounded out my experience of reading that other stuff a decade ago, or whenever that was. So let me just read the start of, well, let me see. What do I have? Well, I will read what Watson says about that. The city of Kyoto, which became the capital of Japan in 794, was laid out in the form of a neat rectangle in imitation of the Chinese city of Chang'an, capital of the Tang dynasty, with the imperial palace in the north and a broad thoroughfare. Suzaku Oji, or the Avenue of the Vermilion Bird, running south from the palace gate and dividing the city into eastern and western sectors. To make room for the new city, the course of the Kamo River, which had originally cut through the center of the site, was shifted to the east, so that it ran south along the edge of the eastern sector. In spite of government measures designed to make the citizens dispose themselves with appropriate symmetry on either side of the central avenue, the western sector seems for various reasons to have been unpopular from the first and, as will be seen, grew increasingly deserted through the years. In addition, because the Kamo had been forcibly shifted out of its natural course, and also perhaps because the aristocracy were cutting down trees to build estates along the upper reaches of the river and its tributaries. The city was troubled by frequent floods. The following piece touches upon these problems that beset the city, as well as that of the urban sprawl that was developing in the eastern and northern suburbs and depriving the citizens of their customary recreational areas, before settling down to a description of the author's own home and the spiritual peace he found there. So as I recall, the first piece is real short, just very bare bones. The second piece is a little bit more expansive, as he says, giving some precursor. And then the third piece is the longest, and the fourth piece takes it back down to really minimal size. Now, as far as that introduction, I first went to Japan. I was probably still a teenager, but I was a very young man regardless. I took some time off from the university and spent a good deal of time there. And that included some time in Kyoto. And I've been back to Kyoto enough times. I mean, and I've never, before this, I never had the geography figured out in my mind. I never really studied it, but that little bit of exposition just really made everything clear to me. And the other funny thing is that I never really liked where the river was. And now I understand it was moved. Back in the year 900 or something like that, the river was moved. And of course, the eastern side is still to this day the more desirable side. The western side is not desolate and deserted, of course, but the highfalutin neighborhoods are over there, and the historic avenues and so forth that you want to amble through are over there. So it's just really marvelous. And somehow when I had tried to read this thing, I don't even think I got as far as that. I think I only read the first one. And it just seemed, as I say, that it just was a shambles and didn't make any sense. So what a little time and a little learning can do. I mean, I've been reading books now for 3 years pretty solidly on a daily basis, and I do find that knowledge tends to reinforce knowledge, which is just a nice aspect of this hobby. So to change things up a little bit, I will read a little bit from the third piece, which is the, I think he calls it an indisputable masterpiece. The longest one, it's the record of the 10-foot square hut by Kamo no Chome. The river flows on unceasingly, but the water is never the same water as before. Bubbles that bob on the surface of the still places disappear one moment to reappear again the next, but they seldom endure for long. And so it is with the people of this world and with the houses they live in. In the shining capital, ridge poles soar side by side, roof tiles vie for height, and the dwellings of eminent and lowly alike seem to endure for generation on generation. But if you inquire into the matter, you find that old houses are in fact very rare. This one burned down a year ago and has just been rebuilt this year. That great mansion fell into ruin to be replaced by smaller houses. And it is the same with the people who live in them. The sites are unchanged. The people occupying them are many. But of those I used to know, hardly 1 or 2 out of 20 or 30 remain. One dies in the morning, another is born at evening. They come and go like froth on the water. So, So the fourth piece is written by the poet Matsuo Basho, very famous here in the West. I mean, very famous everywhere. And I'll read a little excerpt from his piece as well. His is the shortest in the book, and he takes to a small hut by the side of a shrine and decides to spruce it up a little bit. So it is called the Hut of the Phantom Dwelling. The owner was a monk, an uncle of the warrior Suganuma Kyokusui. It has been 8 years since he lived there. Nothing remains of him now but his name, Elder of the Phantom Dwelling. I too gave up city life some 10 years ago, and now I'm approaching 50. I'm like a bagworm that's lost its bag, a snail without its shell. I've tanned my face in the hot sun of Kisakata in O, and bruised my heels on the rough beaches of the northern sea, where tall dunes make walking so hard. And now, this year, here I am drifting by the waves of Lake Biwa. The grebe attaches its floating nest to a single strand of reed, counting on the reed to keep it from washing away in the current. With a similar thought, I mended the thatch on the eaves of the hut, patched up the gaps in the fence, and so forth, like that. He only wound up staying there 6 months. So this book, contrary to the first time I attempted it, really was delightful. You can get this edition easily for like $5 with free shipping in multiple places. And if it sounds like it's something that appeals to you, that's not a bad gamble right there. Any of these others, I think, would probably come a little bit more dearly. I will just show you these all again, not in the same order, but they have been wonderful reads for me to close out the year, and then I am going to start on a hopefully ambitious plan of reading some Chinese history, among some other fictional goals, but this is kind of whetting my appetite for those plans. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.